Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political development in Somali politics and the wider Horn of Africa region. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and co-producer here on HORUFADHI Media. On this week's program, we look at a number of major issues facing the Somali nation, including deployment of UAE personnel and gear to Bosaso, reshuffle of the National Economic Council, political unrest in Somaliland, as well as Hassan Sheikh's trip to Eritrea to visit Somali National Army soldiers. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share. For similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program, and where you can find other exclusive programs, such as the African Weekly Roundup and Mahahis, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into it. On Sunday, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud received credentials from the newly appointed UAE Ambassador Ahmed Jum'a Al-Rumaithi at Villa Somalia. Ambassador Al-Rumaithi replaces Ambassador Mohammed Ahmed Al-Uthman, who served as Abu Dhabi's top representative in Somalia since 2012. According to Villa Somalia, the ambassador conveyed greetings and messages from Mohammed ibn Zayed, the UAE president, and promised to work on the development of diplomatic ties. President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud congratulated Ambassador Ahmed Jum'a Al-Rumaithi on his ambassadorship and wished him success in representing his country, said Villa Somalia. Now, ties between the UAE and Somalia have grown since the controversial decision made by former Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble to release $9.6 million that was previously confiscated by the federal government in 2018. The federal government at that time argued that the delivery of the money did not follow the correct international and local procedures. The money was found in 3 unmarked bags on a Royal Jet plane, and its seizure resulted in an hours-long standoff between airport officials and the UAE embassy staff in Mogadishu. The Royal Jet is an airline based in Abu Dhabi aimed at luxury markets between the UAE and Europe, which resulted in many questioning why this plane was discreetly flown to Mogadishu. Since its release, the sum of $9.6 million that was obtained remains unaccounted for. Now, over the past 4 weeks, at least 20 aircraft arrived in Puntland from the United Arab Emirates carrying armoured vehicles and personnel with the aim of building new military bases in the region. Now, reports from Bosaso airport indicate that at least around roughly 90 UAE personnel arrived with roughly around 10 armoured vehicles, which are currently banned under the arms embargo imposed by the UN Security Council. Now, this information has been sourced from other media outlets and local sources and has not independently been verified, in terms of the numbers at least. Now, sources have also indicated the UAE has an interest in setting up bases in a number of towns in the Bari region of Puntland, which is a coastal border with the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a strait that acts as a doorway to the Red Sea, one of the world's busiest trading routes. The UAE has consistently considered Somalia as a threat to its economic interests in the Middle East, as Somalia has the longest coastline in Africa with a strategic location, and all these ports could be a direct threat to the limited ports the UAE has. Now, currently, the UAE has tackled this issue by taking control of Berbera and Bosaso ports in northern Somalia, with Abu Dhabi now eyeing up Jubaland and the coastal town of Kismayo. Now, interestingly, none of the agreements and discussions held by Puntland President Saeed Abdullah Deni with the UAE, both during his secretive trips to the UAE and vice versa, have been put before the Puntland Regional Parliament to even discuss, meaning that it's highly unlikely that these deals and the reasoning behind the UAE trips to Bosaso will even be public anytime soon. Now, the aforementioned expansion by Abu Dhabi, coupled with recent reports that the Emirati Egyptian governments have begun training a new independent union of Somali soldiers, to demonstrate that the Emiratis are looking to exert a ridiculous amount of influence in Somalia's internal affairs, as seen in Libya and Yemen, while the Mohamud administration continues to watch on. Now move on to the National Economic Council. Now, in a statement released by the Presidential Palace last week, Thursday, the President replaced all members of the National Economic Council via presidential decree in a move that has shocked many. Now, excluding the replacement of members, other changes to the council include a complete reshuffle of the structural organization, which was initially of 3 layers, but now has been reduced to 2 major layers. Now, roughly, the first layer is the Political Economic Decision-Making Committee, and this committee remains unchanged and will comprise of the President, the Prime Minister, Economic Subcommittee of the Cabinet, and Governor of the Bank of Somalia, as well as heads of the federal states. The advisory and research body is the second layer, and this is a committee comprising of 9 members that have been entirely replaced by the president. This body will now come directly underneath the office of the president, and in other words, no political and economic independence, raising many concerns. And the National Economic Council, or the NEC, was formed during the early periods of Somalia's debt relief program in 2018 under the Farmaajo administration. Nevertheless, many have criticized the replacement of experienced members with those that have much less expertise. In the previous council, the least experienced individual had at least 30 years of research and practical experience working within government and non-governmental institutions. Many members served in senior roles in international organizations, including the World Bank, IMF, the African Development Bank. In fact, all had written extensively on the field of economics. During the 4-year period, the NEC released a multitude of reports, held numerous conferences, and released proposals on how the Somali federal government can utilize its resources to develop its economic forecast, while successfully completing the debt relief program, including releasing at least 20 reports and another 30 which remain unreleased. Now, conversely, the same cannot be said about the new members of the 9-member committee. Unlike the previous members, the new members do not have nowhere near the experience. Many have not worked on an international scale and do not have much background on national economic governance and debt relief. The decision to replace such expertise, reduce the layers of the council, as well as bring the NEC underneath the presidency, has raised questions as to why President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud has taken these steps, especially at a time where the president also disbanded the Anti-Corruption Commission only a few weeks ago in October. Now, moving on to Eritrea, where President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud visited Somali soldiers over there. Now, accompanied by Eritrean President HORUFADHI, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud paid a visit to SNA force that recently completed military training. The trainees officially inaugurated last week Friday after undergoing extensive military training for 4 years, which began during the Farmaajo administration. Now, during their stay at the Aviation College, President Aziz and President Hassan were provided a briefing on the current development stage of the college. Now, the two presidents also visited the technology workshop of Sengen Construction Company. This was President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud's second visit to Eritrea to assess Somali soldiers after his first visit in July, when he promised to bring the soldiers back to Somalia. Now, 4 months down the line, the soldiers are yet to return. It is not clear if President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud intends to bring soldiers back during his visit, as Somalia faces a tough battle against Al-Shabaab militants, as the federal government relies on local clan militia known as Ma'awisley to support the limited SNA troops in Hirshabelle and Galmudug. And recently we've seen infighting between clan members, not necessarily the Ma'awisley per se, but there have been fighting between local clans in particular areas across the region. There have been major setbacks made in a number of towns, and this means that it's looking like the battle against Al-Shabaab is now at the tipping point, and it's now more than ever that the Ma'awisley and the Somali National Army need reinforcements in these regions to not just combat Al-Shabaab counterattacks, but also to maintain the territory they currently control. Now, interestingly, during the presidential elections in 2021, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud was a leading voice among a crowd of political figures that made baseless claims that SNA forces trained in Eritrea fought and died in Tigray. Now, ironically, following his first visit in July as president, Mohamud's spokesman Abdikarim Kar denied reports that the SNA forces fought and died in Ethiopia, rather categorizing them as solely rumors. Now, moving on, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud continues the reshuffling of the security apparatus as he pledged during his campaign, with the appointment of Lieutenant Colonel Abdiqani Musa as the new commander of the Somali Naval Forces, replacing General Abdihamid Dirir. Now, state media reported that Lieutenant Colonel Musa became the first soldier trained in Eritrea under the security partnership in 2018 to serve as a commander of a major branch of the SNA. President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud instructed the new commander to continue with the national plans for the reconstruction of the Somali Navy in order to have an army capable of securing the security of the country's waters and defense of our extensive coasts, said Villa Somalia in a statement. Now, the previous naval commander, General Dirir, caught national attention when he accused the former Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble of using his position to acquire land owned by the Somali Navy for construction of private business. This would result in the SNA Chief General Odawaya Yusuf to appoint a committee to investigate allegations made by General Dirir. However, no findings were ever publicly released. Now, former Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble has denied all allegations made against him. Now, moving up north to Somaliland, where opposition parties in the autonomous region have declared that they do not recognize the President Musa Bihi Abdi as being President of Somaliland region, as his legal term expired on the 13th of November. Now, opposition figures went on to argue that the extension was not permissible under Article 88 of the Somaliland Constitution and did not follow the correct procedure, while simultaneously ignoring the plight and interests of other political factors and parties. Instead, opposition figures argue that they will only accept the original framework put forward by the Regional Electoral Commission. The opposition parties conveyed that they recognize the governmental institutions, including the security forces, but argued that they do not recognize the presidency and the administration. On the other hand, Somaliland's Interior Minister Mohammed Kahin Ahmed said that it was unfortunate that opposition parties categorized the Somaliland region as without a government, while Somaliland's Police Chief Mohammed Adan Dabagale said the security forces will take the necessary steps against anyone considered to be a threat to the peace in the region. It was last month when the upper house of Somaliland's regional parliament, known as the House of the Elders, voted to extend the presidential and government terms for another 2 years, an act which was previously predicted and condemned by opposition parties. In August, deadly protests broke out in the region, with demonstrators demanding elections be held in November amid suspicions that President Musa Bihi wanted to delay the poll and extend his terms. Now, clashes between security forces and opposition protesters at the time killed at least 5 people and injured another 100, which was the region's most deadliest clashes in a decade. Now, opposition politicians and human rights groups condemned the brutality of the police against civilian protesters by the Bihi administration at the time. Now, recently, images have surfaced on social media allegedly showing civilians in a number of pro-opposition towns that were carrying weapons, and this, however, has not been independently verified by any media outlet. And finally, over to the federal parliament, which has convened for only its second sitting in 6 months. Now, both houses of parliament held a joint sitting on Villa Hargeisa to mark only the second parliamentary sitting since the presidential elections in May of this year. Now, parliament was opened by President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, in which he gave a speech to parliamentarians outlining his government's plans, while also pleading with legislatures to vote in favor of his government's agenda, which includes tackling security and environmental disasters, he said. The biggest elephant in the room remains the National Security Act, which has remained a controversial bill that has failed to pass through parliament over the past decade. What makes this all the more dire is that Somalia is currently in need of a national security laws to outline the powers and the role of the National Security and Intelligence Agency, NISA, as well as give more power to the police force to tackle not just terrorism, but also target businesses and individuals they deem to be in cahoots with Al-Shabaab, now known as Khawarij, according to the Somali government. Many individuals are concerned that the lack of accountability in Somalia means that it would be quite dangerous to provide such extensive powers to a senior few officials in the security apparatus. Businesses have consistently raised concerns about the possible use of the powers to coerce money and force action. It is quite shameful and a disservice to Somalis that the so-called semi-democratic Parliament of Somalia, which somewhat represents Somalis indirectly, failed to even convene to discuss the important constitutional issues, let alone security, finance and environmental issues facing Somalia, a country that lacks the basic laws to compete in the modern globalized financial world. The basic and the biggest hindrance facing Somalia is an incomplete constitution, which does not seem to be a priority for parliamentarians. Each MP and senator receives $3,000 per month, while doing absolutely nothing. The money could have been easily used to support Ma'awisli fighters across Somalia, as well as drought victims in IDP camps in Benadir and beyond.